Good morning, everyone. How are we doing today? Well, once again here in Kingman, we're doing the. Hey, good morning, Keith. Are you our audio engineer? I still owe you a book, Keith. We got to get together pretty soon. So, how is the audio this morning? Dries, good morning. Nolan and David.
Say hello to a new friend.
Andy, I owe you a book as well.
Take a two-lane trip of memories into
Do we have good audio this morning, folks?
Come along for the ride. Jim Hinckley's America. Jim
Well, let's see if we can do something with that audio. Thank you, Dries. Hey, good morning, everyone. How are we doing today? I have had a most interesting week. We've had a short road trip for my dearest friend's birthday, just a trip down to Lake Havasu City, and working on a couple of new projects that's pretty interesting. Of course, I've always got projects going, and some are interesting, more interesting than others. A bit of desert exploration along the National Old Trails Road. A birthday celebration, as I mentioned, with my dearest friend. That was down in Lake Havasu, and that's part of our desert adventure. And midstream correction from the publisher. They're changing horse in midstream, which is always a frustration. And we've had winter and spring weather all at the same time. This week on Coffee with Jim, it's epic road trips of the past and present. If you need some road trip inspiration, you are going to like this week's program. And if you're fascinated by stories of adventure, these tales are epic. Here's a bit of a teaser. Route 66 was not fully paved until 1936. In that period of time, there was only one motel in Kingman, Arizona that would provide service to African Americans. And yet, Bessie Stringfield traveled throughout the country, and she did it alone. And she did it on a motorcycle. And she made her own roadside repairs. At 19, Bessie began tossing a penny over a map and riding to wherever it landed. And she would earn money at hill climbing events and trick riding at carnivals. Often disguised as a man, she won, in one instance in Florida, she won a flat track race but was denied the prize money when she took off her helmet. And because she was African American, she was escorted from the fairgrounds. This amazing woman lived to be 82 years of age. And aside from her exploits, she founded a motorcycle club and became a registered nurse. She continued riding motorcycles until age 80. Before we begin our road trip adventures, let's take care of a bit of business. I want to give a hearty thank you to the boys of the road crew, Don, Jason, Woody, and Joe, for our theme song. And I want to give a shout out to a few of our sponsors. Let's see, we have Dale Butel's Route 66 Tours. If you want to experience Route 66 on a motorcycle and get the very most from your adventure, contact Dale. And if you're in the Kingman area for coffee and a sweet treat, you can't go wrong with Victoria's Sugar Shack. Then there's the one and only Uranus Fudge Company and General Store. Good fun and excellent fudge may be the highlights, but this is a true roadside treasure that harkens back to the glory days of Route 66. And fittingly, we kick off this morning's adventures with the story of Alexander Winton's road trip. Winton was a pioneering automobile manufacturer, and he was the first person to attempt a coast-to-coast trip by automobile. He only made it from San Francisco to the deserts of Nevada. On this trip, Winton was accompanied by Charles Shanks, a journalist with the Cleveland Plain Dealer and Scientific American. It was a grueling adventure. At one point, Winton had to use an axe to clear a tree from the road. They forded streams, used a block and tackle to pull the vehicle from knee-deep mud. They walked for miles to purchase gasoline. On one day, they were on the road for almost 14 hours and covered 10 miles. They drove into Reno from Truckee, breakfasted at the Riverside Hotel, and pressed on to Wadsworth, Nevada in blinding rain and gale force winds. Then the next day, they crossed unbridged stream beds and washouts. And near Mill City, the wheels dug into ruts of deep sand, and it took 2 days to cover 10 miles. Then they hiked back to Mill City, aborted the trip, and caught the train east and had the car shipped later. The adventure was chronicled in detail in Scientific American. Last year, I posted the entire feature in serial format on our Patreon-based crowdfunding site as exclusive content. I can't help but think that drinking had something to do with Dr. Jackson's adventure. After all, I can't think of any good story or adventure that starts with, they were sitting around and having a salad. Dr. Horatio Nelson Jackson did what Alexander Wooden couldn't. He became the first person to drive an automobile from coast to coast. Ironically, he did it by driving a Winton. Traveling with his co-driver, Sewell Crocker, and a bulldog named Bud that they picked up in Idaho. They encountered people traveling in wagon trains, cowboys who used their lariats to tow them out of sand drifts and mud, and they found ranch wives who would trade home-cooked meals for a ride on the go-like-hell machine. Some people gave directions and deliberately sent them miles out of their way just so their relatives could get a glimpse of an automobile. In Wyoming, Jackson learned that his trip had turned into a race. First, the Packard Company and then the Oldsmobile Company dispatched their own autos and drivers from California in the hopes of passing him and gaining the publicity of being the first to drive across the nation. But after 63 days, 12 hours and 30 minutes, Jackson arrived in New York. Jackson's trip had ignited a national passion for automotive adventures. Hundreds of people made attempts to drive cross-country or border to border and set new records. In 1909, Alice Hewler Ramsey of Hackensack, New Jersey, she became the first woman to drive across the United States. Organized by Cadwallader Kelsey, you can understand why he went by the name of Cal. He was the sales manager for Maxwell Automobiles, and she drove a Maxwell touring car from New York to San Francisco in 59 days as a publicity stunt. This was her first trip, but not her last. Between 1909 and 1975, Ramsey drove across the country more than 30 times. If Jackson's trip had launched a national obsession with road trips, imagine what an around-the-world driving contest unleashed. The epic race was sponsored by the French newspaper Le Matin and the New York Times. The proposed route would take the drivers from New York City across the United States to Washington State, north through Canada into Alaska. The race was held in the dead of winter, as the plan was to have entrants cross the Bering Sea by driving on the ice. and then through Siberia, Russia, and Germany, with the finish being in Paris. In Hudson, New York, cars plowed through foot-deep snow. The trail out of Auburn, which the New York Times described as the worst road in the United States, lived up to its reputation. The three leading cars became mired at a place called Dismal Hollow in the Montezuma Swamp. It took a 6-horse team to pull the vehicles from the mud at a cost of $3 per mile. Every morning at 5 a.m., the race would resume. Drivers were off on the road till 8 p.m. or later. The accompanying mechanics worked late into the night making repairs that ranged from a cracked chassis and leaking radiators to stripped gears and failed bearings. Montague Roberts, aka Monty, drove the Thomas Flyer, and George Schuster was his mechanic. In Wyoming, in sub-zero weather, Schuster walked 10 miles in the dead of night to find 5 gallons of gasoline and paid $20. In Alaska, Schuster investigated the Valdez-Fairbanks Trail in a single-horse sleigh and concluded that the only way to cross Alaska in an automobile would be to dismantle it and ship the parts by dog sled. The Parisian Race Committee, after they were informed about this, they abandoned the idea of Alaska and the Bering Strait and directed the American team to return to Seattle. The revised course called for the cars to sail to Vladivostok, Russia, and drive to Paris from there. Well, some of the drivers didn't get the message and didn't get the message straight. They ended up driving across Japan and Mongolia into Russia. And while the Americans were still at sea from Alaska, their competitors arrived in Seattle and set sail for Russia or Japan. The drivers dealt with Chinese pirates, Manchurian tigers, famine, mud, snow, ice, and, quote, mosquitoes as big as locusts. Some drivers were stranded in the Gobi Desert for days, waiting for gasoline to be delivered by camel caravan. A stripped gear required a 2-day hike to find a blacksmith who could make the parts. Schuster and his crew arrived in Paris on July 30th in the Thomas Flyer. As it was a timed event, they were in the lead since Lieutenant Culpin had been penalized for traveling by train across Wyoming. And as they cruised toward the Place de l'Opera, the finish line, a police officer stopped the Americans. "You are under arrest," he declared. "You have no operational lights on the car." A man on a bicycle with a headlight rode up to the car, jumped off, and deposited his bike in the Flyer next to Schuster. Problem solved. Desert Classic was the official title. Journalists called it the Cactus Derby for good reason, and the name stuck. Each year, the race was held on a different course from Los Angeles to Phoenix across the desert. One year, the course was south of San Diego and then along the Mexican border. Drivers got lost, ended up in Mexico, and had trouble with the federales. Regardless of course, it was a brutal and grueling course that tested man and machine. Once again, I have to suspect drinking was the catalyst for the event. The owner of the Arizona Republican newspaper and some local business owners that were automobile enthusiasts, they were having a heated discussion about the viability of gasoline and steam-powered vehicles. And that was the foundation for this series of races. Whoever placed a bet on gasoline-powered cars in the first race lost, as the winner was Colonel Doc Finner. He was driving a white-built steamer. Even more galling, he beat drivers in brand new cars. And his car was 4 years old and had been driven an estimated 50,000 miles in the desert. For Route 66 enthusiasts, the 1914 race is of particular interest. The course was over the National Old Trails Road, predecessor to Route 66, from Los Angeles to Ash Fork, Arizona. It then turned south through Prescott and down the precipice of Yarnell Hill. The rain and mud were so severe, a reporter noted that Barney Oldfield, with chains on his tires, hit the curb on both sides of the street as he drove through Prescott. Louis Chevrolet dropped out of the race after water was accidentally put into his gas tank in Seligman, Arizona. Barney Oldfield driving a Stutz came up the winner. That was newsworthy. But it was the stories of ingenuity and trials that captured people's attention. One driver had to trim a fence post and wire it into place for a damaged steering column. And a cowboy had to pull Barney Oldfield from the New River near Phoenix. Now here's the character for you. Irwin Cannonball Baker. This guy was legendary during the first decades of the 20th century. He was a showman of extraordinary talent, and he was tougher than a bag of nails. In 1905, he earned his living as a bicycle racer, and in an acrobatic vaudeville act where he beat punching bags with his hands, feet, and head. In 1906, he purchased an Indian motorcycle and became a stunt rider. 2 years later, at a 4th of July picnic in Crawfordsville, Indiana, he entered his first motorcycle race and won. By 1909, he was a member of the factory Indian motorcycle team. He competed at the first motorized competition at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway on August 14, 1909. Then he launched a series of publicity-grabbing stunts, such as racing passenger locomotives from town to town. George Hindi, co-founder and president of Indian, staged the South American tour for Baker in 1912. It was a resounding success. Baker logged 14,000 miles traveling through South America, Jamaica, Cuba, and the jungles of Panama. In the same year, Baker became the first man to cross the United States on a motorcycle. Harry Stutz, founder of Stutz Motor Company, asked Baker to cross the country in one of his famed Stutz Bearcats. When Baker arrived in New York after 11 days, 7 hours, and 15 minutes, newsmen crowned him Cannonball Baker. Baker was such a natural showman, he recognized the value of the name and copyrighted it as Cannon Ball, 2 words that are on his gravesite monument at Crown Hill Cemetery in Indianapolis, Indiana. And during this period, he began offering his promotional services to manufacturers with a no record, no money guarantee. He drove for dozens of companies, including Lexington, Nash, Willis St. Clair, Franklin, Graham Page. And to ensure he always grabbed headlines, he devised new gimmicks. As an example, he once drove an Oldsmobile cross-country exclusively in high gear. He challenged promoters in Australia to pick 2 cities, and he rode between them, setting records with his Indian motorcycle. In 1924, he made the first North American transcontinental winter run for the Gardner Car Company. And later, driving a Rickenbacker, he ran a 3 Flags tour, starting in Vancouver, British Columbia, and ending in Tijuana, Mexico. And a big attention-garnering contest was his 1928 victory in a New York to Chicago race against the 20th Century Limited locomotive. Racing and promotion were epic road trip adventures, but the simple act of driving an automobile across the United States, that was an adventure. Emily Post chronicled her adventure in a best-selling book, By Motor to the Golden Gate. I highly recommend this read, which has been reprinted and is now available through Amazon. Edsel Ford and some college buddies, they set out from Dearborn for the Panama Pacific Exposition in San Francisco during the summer of 1915. They were counted among more than 20,000 people that drove to the exhibition from outside the state of California. Edsel drove a Ford Model T and kept a meticulous journal. His friends had a new Stutz and a new Cadillac. I am amazed at what they simply considered an expected part of a drive to California. Bent wheels, broken wheels, a stripped rear differential near the Grand Canyon that required a roadside repair and a 10-mile hike for parts, mud, more washed out roads, broken U-joints, broken springs. In the desert near Ludlow at midnight, they listened to music on a portable phonograph while repairing a tire. The second tire repair of the day's drive that was less than 125 miles. As exclusive content on our Patreon-based crowdfunding website, I recently posted Edsel's entire journal in serial format, and I also included photos from their trip. It is an insightful read. Here's an interesting story that I recently discovered. On May 2nd, 1915, 26-year-old Effie Hotchkiss, she set off from her home in Brooklyn, New York for the Panama Pacific Exposition in San Francisco with her, quote, rotund 52-year-old mother. For two women to drive a car on such an adventure would have been amazing. Effie was driving a 3-speed Harley Davidson, and her mother, Avis, was stuffed in a sidecar with the tools, clothes, and a gun. Avis had tagged along for the adventure to keep Effie in check. Her daughter had earned a reputation as a speed demon. She had been ticketed for cruising at 35 miles per hour on Brooklyn's Ocean Parkway. In another incident, her speed was estimated to be in excess of 70 miles per hour. Fortunately, Effie was a very adept mechanic. Obviously, this proved to be a valuable talent on their 2-month road trip to California. And there are still some adventuresome people out there, and some like to add zest to their odyssey. Case in point, the intrepid Zapp family of Argentina. I don't even know what to say about these people, but I'd sure like to meet them and sit down and buy them a glass of beer and visit a bit. Herman and Candelaria Zapp were newlyweds in 2000, and as they both had long dreamed of an adventure outside of their native Argentina, for their honeymoon they decided to drive to Alaska. And to make the trip really interesting, they borrowed a 1928 Graham Page from his grandfather. To get across the Amazon, they had to balance the car on 2 wooden boats tied together. And that was just at the beginning of their adventure. Their 4 children were all born on the road in the United States, Argentina, Vancouver Island, and Australia. The kids have had quite an education as they've spent thousands of nights in the homes of generous benefactors all over the world. They're pretty talented mechanics. The children know several languages. They're familiar with different religions, food, culture, and how people live in different countries. What an education those kids have had. The honeymoon adventure lasted 17 years. It was a journey through 73 countries and 6 continents in a 1928 automobile. Ooh, let's see, what time is it? We're running try to keep her about a half hour. Beating my gums here, don't want to wear out my welcome, but I think we have time for one more. In the summer of 2012, Dirk and his wife Trudy, who lived in the Netherlands, decided to take a trip. They really didn't have a destination in mind at first. They just loaded up their car, a 1915 Ford, and they set out. After driving across Europe and through the Middle East and down the length of Africa, 180 days later, they arrived in Cape Town, South Africa. In 2013, they drove 17,000 miles in the United States and Canada in their 1915 Ford. They followed that up with 16,000 mile tour of South America, again in 180 days. And in addition to an adventure, these folks turned the trip into a fundraising initiative for orphaned children. In 2014, the adventurers had a bit of a mishap back in Europe. While driving in Belgium, the Tin Lizzie was hit by a truck. Dirk and his wife miraculously escaped with minor injuries, but the car was severely damaged. The restoration of the Model T took 2 years. And then in 2018, they hit the road again. They set out to tour the North and South Islands of New Zealand. That was followed by trips in Australia, China, and Mongolia. To give you an idea of the troubles they encountered and their creativity, in Bolivia, when the Model T's crankshaft bearing failed, Dirk made a bearing from a leather belt along the road and continued to drive into Argentina where he could get proper repairs made. Hey, before I get to your questions, I got to say thank you to Connie at the iconic Wagon Wheel Motel in Cuba, Missouri. The one and only Louis Keene, the unofficial mayor at Uranus Fudge Company and General Store. That's a place you just have to experience. You cannot describe Uranus. Of course, David Brenner at the Roadrunner Lodge in Tucumcari, New Mexico. And Marian Pavel of the Route 66 navigation app. Of course, also the Mother Road Route 66 passport. And he also has a free ebook on his website about planning a Route 66 trip. And then there's our trivia cat. Andy Sampson was last week's winner. The commercial hotel in Kingman, Arizona began life as the Mojave County Courthouse. Okay, this week the prize for the first right answer is a Jim Hinckley's America pin. Are you ready? While traveling along the National Old Trails Road in 1915, Edsel Ford was warned about highwaymen waylaying travelers. He was told to travel in groups. In what city was he given this warning? Next week on Coffee with Jim, I will be sharing a few of my favorite places, so a few hidden gems in my adopted hometown of Kingman, Arizona. I hope that you can join us and invite your friends, and let's make it a coffee party. Now, let's see what we got here. We'll answer a few of your questions and get to our notes. And we always had Keith Kentner with us. We owe him a book from a couple of weeks ago. He was our trivia contest winner. Mr. Dries Bessels, talented woodworker, God, the Renaissance man all the way around. Good to have you with us from the Netherlands. We had Nolan Stoltz from the East Coast. We have David from Louisville, Kentucky, and of course Andy from Tucson. And yes, say hello to Marion for me. Very good. I'll send you a message, Keith. Mike, all the way from Iowa, good morning. And Ken Yowden from snowy Colorado. Bullhead the Needles, July, any year with no AC. Yeah, I can remember those days, but can you imagine doing that back in 1915, all dirt roads? Clemens, good morning. And Sandra, too. My goodness, we have quite a crowd from the Netherlands this morning. Ian, those are all some great road trips. Just wonderful, wonderful road trips. As always, I am so glad that everybody could join us. I hope you found this of interest. And, well, like I say, next week we're going to get together and talk about Kingman, Arizona. Lots and lots of great things coming up. I don't know if you saw the new video series I'm working on with the Bee. I'll post that this morning. We took a tour of the Benelli house. Dries, Sandra, Clemens, Ian, next time you're in Kingman, you need to let me show you the Benelli house. Quite a fascinating place. Well, it looks like our half hour is about up. I am always so glad that we can get together on Sunday. I just wish that we could do it in person. But soon, my friends, either here or there. I hope to be taking the show on the road again this year. And I want to give a shout out. If you would like to schedule a presentation for your group, for your organization, please contact me. I hope to be on the road this fall and making presentations in person. And later I'll be sharing another live program to kind of bring you up to speed on some projects that I'm working on. But that's about it this morning. Is there any questions? Anything I can answer for you? Thank you, Ian. We're still working on that Zoom situation. I think we about got it. We're going to be doing something with Dave Clark, the Windy City Warrior out of Chicago pretty soon. Roundtable. I think that's on the 6th of April. Ah, Clemens, I do too. I do too. We've done so little travel. This trip with Judy down to this was her. I don't even know how to say this, but last year the big high point was I packed the house out, did a presentation at the El Garces in Needles, California, and I'm grateful. It was a good event. We had a lot of fun. Had almost 200 people in attendance, and then everything shut down. We were done, and that was Judy's last real road trip until we went to Lake Havasu City last week. And last year, my entire travels, I made one trip to Needles and one to Seligman. So it's 120 miles, 60 miles each way to Needles, and about 90, 95 miles each way to Seligman. And that was the entire extent of our travels last year. And I have so missed visiting with our friends and missed being on the road. I think that's the least traveled I have been since 1959. Guys, yes, I really am that old. Join me next week. We are going to have some fun in Kingman, Arizona. I got some places to share with you, some stories to tell, and I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised. My friends, until we meet again, adios. Vaya con Dios, mi amigos.